everybody. First item on the agenda is additions or modifications to the agenda. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add or change? No? I have some things, but I can talk about them in the commissioners' updates comments. I did speak to our guest here, and Chief Wright, I'm gonna make an introduction to you after the post-meeting, because there's an issue that this woman has that I think is best just talking with you.
Okay.
So next is Chief's report.
All right, so Chief Raposo is actually at City Hall. There's quite a crowd there, and he thought that it was very important for him as a leader to be there. So I hope you don't feel like it's less of me to be here as your leader. Thank you.
There's a lot going on.
There is. A couple of things that we wanted to mention was our new deputy chief, who was here last meeting, is fitting in very nicely, and he is scheduled to go to the Waiver Academy next week, and I'm looking very forward to that. We did have a supervisor's retreat last week, the week before last, 17th, which is almost nearly unheard of, where we had every supervisor except one who had surgery present, and South Burlington actually covered our city for a period of time to cover for us. We had an entire day worth of training and information sharing, so that worked out really well. We did talk about the police commission and the fact that we need to get more information about you to our officers so they know who you are, and vice versa. So one of the things that they asked for was bios from each of you, so we could review that in roll calls, and they would have more of an opportunity to come here to come to the police commission meetings as well. So at some point, if we can get those together, that would be awesome. We had our swearing-in ceremony for new supervisors, and I think we had one new employee, correct?
We have a new emergency communications specialist, and then the deputy chief.
Right.
And then 5 promotions.
5 promotions, 3 sergeants, 2 lieutenants, and then deputy chief and a new dispatcher. We are in need of dispatchers, so anybody who's interested, please apply. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else right now, unless anybody has any questions.
Can you give us an update about what's happening at City Hall?
Yeah, it's, I think it's basically, is it a vigil for the, regarding the incident that happened in Pittsburgh, the shooting at the synagogue. It's a packed house. I was sent a picture of it, and it's full downstairs, standing room only, and upstairs. I think it's important for us to recognize, what happens around this country, and that we're all in support of the people who are responding, the people who are involved, and support for the Jewish community. Bob?
The super wagon that you have, was that out today?
It could very well
I
been
thought I
likely,
saw it.
yes.
Yeah, lights and siren going down North Avenue. Is it used for special incidents, or is it just?
There's the officers that are assigned to that unit are on shift. So whoever's been trained with the equipment that's on the truck, drive the truck. And they do have specific areas they patrol. For the most part, we try to have it available throughout the city. So they may have been responding to a call in the north end at that time.
Thanks.
Yeah.
What is the super truck?
Super truck. Super truck is what we call ERV. It's an emergency response vehicle. It's it looks like basically a F-350, or is it a F-550 with a cargo banks on the back, and it contains a bunch of equipment that we use in different types of situations. For the most part, it's less lethal options for when we go to a barricaded subject or someone who needs our assistance, but we don't want to get to that point where we have to have a fatal encounter. So there's all sorts of tools that we have on that truck that can help us. Yep.
Just on that issue, am I correct that there is a policy that's being worked on we're going to receive some kind of a policy on the use of that vehicle, or?
That is true. Right now we have just a memo that's out there to the officers who are assigned to drive that vehicle about the truck itself, about the use of it. Each officer that has that drives it has gone through training with the fire department for a larger vehicle style of driving, and each officer that's assigned on there has had special training in regards to every piece of equipment that's on the truck. We're still waiting for some pieces of equipment to come in, so we'll always be doing additional trainings.
But again, I guess I understood that there would be a procedure that we would
Yeah.
be presented as part of the department's procedures, and we would get an opportunity to review and
You will.
adopt.
You will. It's in memo form right now, just to cover the officers that are out there right now, but it will eventually be in the format of a directive. So you'll see that.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Chief Wright.
You bet.
Commendation letters. We had, Laura sent us some of the recent commendation letters, very nice notes about our officers. And I guess the new information there is people can now not only file complaints via the website, they can file letters of praise and commendation, so that's great.
Yeah, Nancy in the back here, who often joins us, is responsible for getting it up and running.
That's
I think
great.
we went live on Friday maybe, but we haven't really told anybody about it. So if you all could take a look and review, and it would be nice to kind of announce or kind of let people know it's out there once we update it with the new letter regarding complaints, because it's kind of housed in one section, complaints and feedback about police conduct. And there's, you can do it online, and then you'll also can print the form. And it also mentions availability throughout the community. So we'll tie all that together as we kind of complete this letter. There is a current letter that's up there already that we wanted to update, so.
Okay.
Once we have all that assembled and everyone's had a chance to take a look, we can kind of let people know that it's all ready to go.
So, youth on commissions, the next item on the agenda. And Laura received an email from the community relations person at CEDO. Her name is Fett. There's, in 2003, I think a resolution was passed that allowed and encouraged youth commissioners on 3 commissions. I think it was this one, Fire and Parks, maybe. There's 3. And she's kind of breathing new life into that right now as a way to engage young people in the public process. And she wanted to know if we were interested in having 1 or 2 youth commissioners. She's in the process of recruiting right now. What that would mean is they would come, they'd serve on the commission, they would be non-voting members, and they would not attend executive session with us. And their absence doesn't affect whether we have a quorum or not. It's a way to have young people understand how the public process works. Personally, I think it's a great idea to get young folks involved and to, they have a voice at the table and be able to ask questions and participate, just not vote. So wanted to get all of your thoughts on that.
Sounds great.
It does sound great.
I'm all for it.
Yeah.
What are the age range for youth commissioners?
I'm not sure. My guess is high school, but I'm
Yes.
not.
Yeah.
It's high school?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because over 18, they wouldn't really be considered youth, and middle school probably is too young, so.
Yeah, it's high school.
Yeah.
Would they be selected in some way, or is there some?
They're selected through this program that CEDO has. They have to actually recruit them, and then it's actually pretty cool. She would not just recruit them, but then she'd have a training for how city government works, and they'd all come together the students that want to participate on the 3 commissions, and then, participate on the commission, then come back together, share what they're learning, and have this woman facilitate their learning. So they would be kind of like interns.
Along with the term B?
I don't know.
Do you know anything about the recruitment process?
Nope. Nope. But I could certainly put you in touch with FET, who could answer all those questions.
It would be nice to do a 2-year term at least, have it be someone who is no older than 2 years from 18, so that they have, it's a learning curve, right? That 1 year, the first year you're on something like this. It would be nice if it could be a 2-year term.
I have the resolution here, but it's not, I don't see that
It
it
might
says.
not get into that detail, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It sounds like it's still a pilot, so they may just be trying to figure it out. So if everybody's okay with trying and having a student or 2, I'll let her know, and I'll put you in
Great.
touch with her so we can get the details, because you're really good at that, detail asking questions. So, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Eileen and Nick, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So Eileen Blackwood and Nick Lopez, both city attorney's office. I met with both of these folks looking at the resolution and the document that's the role of the police commission in civilian oversight. And thank you for coming tonight to answer our questions. I did email Jim your question, which I don't know if I did it justice, but they at least have a heads up. And Randall, I forwarded your questions that you emailed me and one of the other ones. So we can well, let me just give a little more context before we dive into the weeds. The Public Safety Committee extended by almost a year when we have to go and give our feedback to this process of civilian oversight. So my plan is to go, and anyone is welcome to join me. Actually, it's not the plan. I have to go to the Public Safety Committee meeting in December. They want our response and answers. They gave us an extension. So this
Did you
is
say
the-
December? I'm sorry.
December meeting. And I'd love it if Peter and I went last time. Peter, I'd love you to come again. If anyone else wants to come, that would be great. And they want to kind of say, okay, now we can announce it to the community, and let's just start doing this. So that's the plan. So to make sure that we have all the questions answered here, Eileen and Nick are here to answer any of the detailed questions. So, Jim, do you want to start? Because I know you had something very specific.
I don't really need to start.
Well, we only have really a couple of questions unless things come.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to to start. Eileen, just having the history that I had, I have seen the commission to be a, part of this department, part of the management of the department. At least that's been my perception of it over the years. And so when this came up initially, I had some concern about how we could be both a transparent, independent oversight board, if you would, and at the same time engaged in the management of the department. Unlike, as I read, and I'm no expert on this, but as I read about what's happening in terms of oversight around the country, boards get created, independent boards, separate from the department. Their only role is to have an oversight, and there's obvious transparency that can be generated from that. And I've come to believe that we probably are doing this correctly in the sense that we're a small community and we are an independent board, if you will, but we also are part of the management of the department. And so I just had some underlying concerns about the perception of what we're creating here. I know the resolution talks about independence and transparency and things. We've set up a process that I think is working reasonably well, but it is what it is. And so I have that underlying concern. And then, in addition to that, as you know, we have a role in the labor world, in the dispute resolution procedures here at the department. Again, back in my own experience, you know, we would view we viewed the commission as just part of management. Any serious discipline had already been fully discussed by chief and commission. So if we didn't get past the chief, we would go to arbitration. We would just kind of skip this process. So again, all of that is just some observations of my own experience, but in trying to establish something that is truly transparent and independent, you know, I was interested in your thoughts around just perception and not you know, portraying ourselves as doing something that we're not doing, and yet at the same time creating something that's useful and effective for the community.
Great, and I think to some extent what you're asking is kind of the heart of the question. There are a number of different models around the country for how to provide oversight to police departments, and you do see it's almost entirely in larger cities where they have a lot more money to fund an independent commission, but you do see an independent commission that is totally separate from the police department that just handles complaints that are brought to it, and you know, maybe kind of like the Human Rights Commission in Vermont deals with complaints of discrimination, et cetera, as an independent entity. That's a really different model. First of all, you have to have enough money to set up, and most of those commissions have a staff of their own. They function as a separate body. So that's sort of one parameter we were working within is money, is cost, and it didn't seem feasible to be recommending a completely independent council that would look at it. In addition, almost all of those have been set up as a result of very serious problems in the police department where that have not been being addressed by the management of the police department. They've often been set up as part of a consent decree or some other process where there has been some kind of serious issue that seems to be rampant throughout the police department. We also aren't in that position, luckily. So those are two of the reasons why we sort of said, okay, so if we don't have the money to set up a completely independent entity, and we don't, and we're not sure that it's justified under the circumstances that we have, you know, what's the next model that we look at? And as you know, we started with the state police. So I think that's a piece of, just to give you a little background about how we kind of get to thinking about this. And this is not an unusual model in many police departments to have a commission that is, you know, you all are, and I'm sure each one of you is going to say, yeah, I want to be independent. That's my, you know, I want to come to this with fresh eyes. That's really the idea, that you're going to come to this with fresh eyes and from a different perspective, and from the perspective of the community, to give feedback to the chief, to give feedback to the department on these. We do have, as Jim mentioned, there is a grievance procedure in the union contract that has you all as a step in the process. We're in negotiations right now, and the language of that may change a little bit, but the substance of it is still going to have you all be a step 2 that is an independent only in the sense of you are in that grievance process, you're going to be able to make a decision as far as that goes. There's also an appeal process in the charter that allows an officer to appeal a demotion or a suspension of more than 14 days or a demotion or a dismissal to you all. And again, you actually have a decision-making authority in that. So we already have these processes set up where you all are seen as kind of a step aside, perhaps not completely independent, because they know you do have knowledge of the police department, but it's kind of coming from your operational role, that you would also be able to make some of those decisions. And I think we were looking at this is an extension of that, and that's what we've been talking about is, you know, how do you all get to kind of be a check on the chief and say, hey, we're representing the community, chief, think about this. I think one of the examples that I gave, and I know some of you were here before when I spoke about this, was there was a situation a few years ago that I was involved in where we came to the police commission, the chief and I, and said, you know, we have this serious situation, here's what we're thinking about doing. And the commission, you know, absolutely said, you know, I'm not entirely comfortable with what you're proposing. I think, you know, you should be doing a little bit more than what you're doing. And to me, that was exactly the role that I think we're setting up here, is so citizens can come to you and citizens can say, hey, you know, this is what's going on, and I mean come to you like formally in this way, and that you all will be the representatives of the community here to be able to give feedback around that. One last point is the city council often sits in very similar role in lots of other areas of the city where they know they're the managers of the city and they have authority in terms of the operation and management of the city, but they do sit as this group of citizens that folks can come in before and say, hey, this thing is going on, bring a little more community focus than the everyday focus of the department, and that's the goal.
What happens if, when you come and explain it and we say we're not comfortable with it, what happens next?
So under this, I mean, essentially what we're setting up in terms of this is that's really where citizens can go, is here. Now, folks can always go to the mayor and to the city council if they have, you know, any citizen can always do that.
So we say we're not comfortable and that's the end of it, they go to the city council. Okay. That's what's been established.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could you say more about what the justification is behind the role that the city council that the police commission currently plays in the grievance process?
The justification for it. So right now, there is set up a situation where if there is a step one which is if a union member or the union is unhappy with something that is occurring, they can take that issue to the chief as the step one, and then they have an option to take it to the police commission. They don't have to. They could choose to go directly to arbitration, and as Jim noted, it's my understanding in the past that's happened a fair amount. But I believe that the idea is that the police commission is indeed a group of citizens, and sometimes folks feel like the police chief is being rogue or is not doing what they think the community values and that the community would say, and so the police commission provides a place for folks to come. I don't want to put you on the spot, but you can probably talk about what officers think about that.
I mean, I don't know about how officers think, but I can tell you that what, at least my limited experience here, and I've only been on here a couple of years, but we haven't had a lot of these instances, but the chief will come in executive session and tell us, you know, some of the more serious disciplinary matters and some of what he's been thinking about and what he's going to recommend, and we all kind of, you know, we give him some input, but for the most part we agree, and then he goes back and the discipline is done, and then there's an appeal, let's say, and it seems then to come back to us. If it comes back to us, then having already had this conversation with the chief and said, okay, you know, let's say go with it, to have someone come in saying why you should now reverse the chief, didn't seem to, you know, it seemed like it was more one entity that was making this decision, and if we want to appeal it, we need to go beyond the department, so to speak, including the commission. And I don't know, we haven't had a lot of experience in the last couple of years with this, and there's been some discussion about, I think, Michelle, I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn here, but there was some discussion about limiting the numbers of people who would hear some discipline on the commission initially, and then so that if it was appealed, there'd be other members who didn't sit and hear the chief's explanation and participate, so there would still be some independence if in fact it was needed. That was one thought, I think, that
That was a thought.
we threw that around at one point. I mean, again, just trying to maintain independence in the process. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's no question that this process we set up is not true, complete independence. It's not like having a completely independent quasi-judicial board that you get to come before that knows absolutely nothing and both sides present from scratch. This is not set up to be that system.
But it sounds like that's what's different on an appeal process, is that we'd hear from both sides where we wouldn't initially. Is that true? I mean, we'd take a second look at it in an appeal process. I haven't been through it. It hasn't occurred since I've been on, but that would be different. You know, we'd hear from.
And there's still an appeal process. So if the officer comes and wants to talk to the commission and doesn't get the results that they're looking for, there's an appeal process after that. We're not the last.
Right.
The officer, the
step.
union can
The
take it to
union
arbitration.
can take it to arbitration,
Yeah,
so.
the union can.
But the
So-
citizen doesn't. If you're
Right.
looking at the two sides, the citizen doesn't then have a separate place to appeal to.
Okay, so we're looking at it from two, so we're really looking at, what this is really about is the citizen, this is citizen oversight of complaints outside the police officer, outside the police department about police conduct. So that would not go to arbitration.
Correct. Well, what would go to arbitration
Discipline
is the
would. Mhm.
discipline
Yep, yep,
imposed on
gotcha.
the officer, if the officer and the department disagree.
Yep.
So there could be, I'm sorry. No, so in any one instance, there could be a citizen complaint over, let's say, an abuse of force, and it comes to us as a citizen complaint. Meanwhile, there's an investigation and discipline over it, which could then come circle its way back in the context of an appeal. So we could theoretically hear that same set of facts in two different procedures. It's possible.
Absolutely. That is how this system is set up.
So as I understand it, so there is a formal role for the police commission to play in the disciplinary process, but right now that's an optional move for an officer who's subject to a complaint to take or to avail themselves of. And do you have any idea whether officers have availed themselves of that option in the past? I mean, since this policy has been in effect?
They have not since I've been here since 2012. Jim probably has a much longer history of whether.
I recall occasionally, coming to the commission, but for the most part, I mean, we didn't have a lot either. We've been fortunate in this city with good police chiefs and not a lot of abuse, but.
But it's also your suggestion that because people might see the commission as just an extension of the police department, again, management, you wouldn't avail yourself of that option of appeal of going to the commission. If you're concerned about the disciplinary judgment, you just go directly to arbitration.
Well, if you're a police officer and you're appealing discipline, and you're going to come to the commission, you are aware that the commission has already heard from the chief in executive session about your case, and has more or less presumably agreed with the chief, not necessarily, but presumably. So now you're coming in to try to change that. And, you've already got a chief making a decision or a recommendation, a commission, let's say, affirming it, go with it, it sounds good to us, and now you're asking for us to change it. And I think it may make sense to do that if there's a lot of new information that a union could present at a hearing. It may make sense, or it may not. I think I have less concern about that, because that's more transparent, frankly, than the citizen complaint, who may not understand, or think that there is, a transparency and an independence, which there may be or may not, given the perception of our role here in helping to run the department. But again, I think as you said, given the size of the city and the options and the existence of this already, I think it's probably the best system we can set up.
Well, right. So let me be clear why I'm asking, right? Because part of the constraints on how we've been setting up the role that we play in judgment, in either citizen complaints or in police discipline, is because of the role that we play currently in the collective bargaining about how it is the disciplinary manager handled, right? So that puts certain constraints on the way we set up our process of interacting with the complaints. And I'm essentially wondering why we still have that formal role in the disciplinary process if we're not if officers aren't usually availing themselves of that option. And you suggested that in the next round of collective bargaining, we might still have something like that role. And so I'm wondering essentially why we have that role, or why we might have that role in the next round of collective bargaining.
Because, I can't talk to you about what goes on in bargaining, but, while we're in the middle of it, but in essence, because the two sides have agreed that it's a useful step to have in the grievance process.
Yep, and if the union feels it's a useful step, then.
Right.
Randall, you had some other questions.
I did, I mean, it sounds like they were all sent via email to you,
Yeah.
so if you have them, you're welcome to respond to any ones that you see fit to respond to.
I have an email, I thought I had a second. Thank you. Okay, let's see. Your first question was item 7, the chief may accept or reject the commission's recommendations. And you're curious as to whether there's a legal requirement the city attorney's office be contacted separate from a legal requirement of whether there's confidential information. No. The point of having you contact the city attorney's office is just to ensure that whatever, that we are clear as to what is public and what is not public information that you have. That's really, that's our role in it. We, as the city attorney's office, we represent the city as a corporation, which means that when you're acting as police commissioners, we represent you. And you all also have the same obligation as the city has not to disclose confidential information, say about a police officer. That may be different from a complaint, but you may, in the course of what you get confidential information, and this is really just for us to make sure that we know, what it is, whether or not there is confidential information that you have that you want to disclose, because our office may not have been involved. In other words, the chief may have been to you, may have given you information, and our goal is just to make sure that if it's going up the chain to the politicians who are in a more public role, that we know, that you know what's confidential information and that we're able to advise you on that.
So in your estimation, then would a policy that did not have that explicit requirement that the commission consult with the city attorney's office prior to escalating a concern to the mayor, would that be?
You don't have to put that in the policy if you don't want. I think our purpose was really just to flag it and say, here, we want to make sure that you all check in. One of your later questions, I think, asks, is there any information you would have that the mayor wouldn't have access to? Generally, the mayor doesn't get information about individual employee discipline unless there's a reason for the mayor to be consulted on it, because the mayor doesn't make the decision about individual employee discipline stuff. So when you say, is there information, there may be information that hasn't gone to him.
Correct. But it wouldn't be a violation of confidentiality is the question.
But it wouldn't be a violation of confidentiality.
Right.
Except in very unusual circumstances, but.
I mean, I don't want to get into too many hypotheticals, but can you imagine what sort of circumstance that might be?
If the mayor were involved in some way.
Okay.
I guess my thinking, and I'd be curious what everyone else is thinking, is I'm trying to think it's not us, it's 5 years from now, and we're having these conversations about confidentiality, that if we had it in here, it's just a checkpoint. It's just that it may cause future commissioners to pause, talk to the city attorney, educate themselves on how the city works and the confidentiality. That's not a, I don't personally see a problem with keeping it in. Does anybody else?
Well, so here's the problem, I think, right? So insofar as the commission is supposed to represent a kind of outside voice or check on the procedure of the department, right? So if there are concerns about the way that the department is handling a citizen complaint, the more institutional barriers there are to the commission registering its concerns, the more opportunities there are for for that kind of ethical check on the department's behavior to be lost within the system, essentially, right? So if you say, well, first you have to check with the city attorney's office and the city attorney's office, well, we judge for whatever reason that you shouldn't say these things, release this information, then that's a check which might not be required or necessary, right? So it seems like it seems to me to be an unnecessary step in the process, which might just delay the function that I take the commission ought to be serving.
Can I just say, just one thing to that,
Please.
is that, remember, all we do is give advice.
Yes.
So we wouldn't say to you, we would say to you, you probably shouldn't, or this is confidential information, but we don't get to say to you, no, you can't say that to the mayor.
Right. the way that the policy was written up made that unclear.
Okay.
And so that was one of the concerns I think that I had about
So
the way
we
that was
might-
written up.
We probably could work on writing it, you know, to indicate that, like, we could say that you should consult the city attorney's office for advice about confidentiality or something.
Focusing
You
it
know-
on advice and
Yeah.
and less on an approval process.
But then there's also a worry that that might essentially kind of, then also slow the process down. I say, okay, so, you know, you need to consult for advice. It takes a long time for the advice to come. We're worried that, well, now you can't do anything prior to receiving the advice, or you can't escalate a concern to the mayor or the city council prior to receiving the advice. The advice takes months to come, right? And that's the sort of worry that I would have about having that kind of formal step in the process that says that the city's attorney's office has to be involved in one way or another.
So it says the commission, if a majority of the commission disagrees with the chief's decision, the commission may appeal to the mayor, but must first contact the city attorney's office to avoid disclosure of confidential information. Any suggestions on?
Yeah, so we could rewrite that to say something, it could say something like, but should consult the city attorney's office concerning before disclosing? I don't know. I'm not sure all of that's addressing your concern.
Right, well, right, and I mean, but you already mentioned the other concern that I had, which was if this step is talking about the escalation to the mayor's office, it's not clear to me what, again, like, other than these hypothetical cases, it's not clear why there would be a concern about disclosing confidential information in the first place. So this is not talking about escalating a concern to anyone other than the mayor. Why are we consulting the city attorney's office to make sure we're not disclosing confidential information to the mayor when that probably not, constituted disclosure of confidential information in the first place? Right, that's a worry.
Couple different, another thing is that generally we don't, for example, if there were medical information about a party, we don't usually send that via email.
Sure.
And we might send it through a more protective method. Those are the kind of things that we might just sit and chat with you about. These are ways that you can, we could give you advice about some of the ways that you don't step over a line that gets folks in trouble. I think that's really what we're trying to do, is to protect the city from some communication happening that ends up becoming problematic. That's what we're thinking about. Anyway.
It seems to me that might be better handled by kind of having it by more properly defining the way that a complaint would be escalated to the mayor, rather than describing the steps that need to be taken prior to that happening, right? So again, I don't know that we've carefully defined the way that a complaint is escalated to the mayor, the city council, whomever, but it seems like that might be the better way to handle that.
Well, I think it's defined by if the chief's decision is X and we don't agree with it, then our next recourse is to go to the mayor.
Right, no, that's not, right, so the question is like, what form does that escalation take, right? So that itself can be defined, right? So in order to appeal to the mayor, this is the way to do it. That can be defined more carefully, and that would avoid, I think, the problems that we're worried about. If the worries are, well, confidential information might be disclosed via email, then just say this is what the complaint or escalation would look like. This is the form that it would take. This is the information that can be included, et cetera.
Right.
I guess, let me just say, I don't see that you necessarily have to contact us first. I mean, I think if there's a concern about that, that's fine. I think we would like to be clear that we're available, and we want to be clear that there's some sensitivity about, because you're dealing with, a citizen and an employee, assuming there's an employee on the other end, there's a concern about how that concern gets transmitted, what kind of public record is created,
So it's more that the commission could avail itself of the city attorney's advice regarding privacy concerns.
Yeah.
In general, it seems to me as though that sort of concern is better handled by proper education when someone takes on the duty of being a police commissioner, rather than in the formal process of escalating concerns about the way the disciplinary matter was handled or the way the citizen complaint was handled, right? So, so we as police commissioners ought to be educated about the sorts of sensitive information we might have, about the way, about what it is to be responsible with that information, without that being built into the complaint escalation process.
I would be comfortable around, I don't know if you are, what you guys, with using the language that Shireen just came up with, just stating that the city attorney's office is available, not saying, this says must contact. So if we just change it to is available.
I'm fine with that.
And truthfully, I needed to talk to these guys, and what I needed to talk to them about was not like time sensitive or urgent, and it was like a day, and you were available, and I went in and talked with them. It was very simple, and this was not, like I said, so, but again, we don't have to.
I would be fine with that revision of the language for sure.
Yeah.
Yep, I would agree. I think it should be left to the individual commissioner with an assumption that we've been trained and we know what we can and cannot do, but that your office is available for consultation if one of us wants to avail ourselves of that before speaking with the mayor.
And I'm thinking, we're talking about hypothetical situations. Suppose we have a real serious incident. We really don't agree with the chief. The officer really needs to be disciplined. We, if we're not careful, could screw up the case by putting something medical in it, but by doing something we shouldn't, we actually are gonna hurt what the case that we're trying to make. And so that's my concern, that we would inadvertently do something that would not be helpful to the citizen complaint that we're trying to.
If I were in that position, I would think it'd be a great benefit to be able to consult
Right.
with the city attorney. So
Right.
I plan, if that ever happens, I'm pretty sure I'm going to want to get all the advice I can, something that serious.
It's important to have it delineated that that's something we have available, because I know when we did the vicious animal hearing, we really didn't have any guidance about the role of counsel for our hearing panel, right? So it's nice to have this in writing, know that we can use the city attorney for guidance.
That's a good point, because we were kind of floundering on, it got more complicated than
Right.
we ever
We didn't have
thought it
something
would.
Well,
to
and the
go
big
to
problem
that-
was that the person didn't get notice, at least the part I, yeah.
But for us, it was really understanding that we really had counsel that we could think of as our own.
Yeah.
And one other thing you all should just know is that if there is a situation where our office is representing the chief, say in a disciplinary matter and there's something going on, we will hire independent counsel for you all, if you request it. But we leave it, the way the city works is we leave it to you to tell us you want us to do that, and then we hire independent counsel.
That would also happen in disciplinary matters. When we did go to the commission, the city attorney would be representing the city in that adversarial proceeding, and the city would hire independent counsel. It used to be all McNeil's firm until we pointed out that wasn't really independent.
Not really independent,
But
but
yeah.
now
so-
we have independent counsel.
Yeah.
I would just point out, I think the last thing I would say on that point is, I'm hearing some concerns from people on the commission that the process itself might be complicated or abused by a commissioner who might be acting in good faith but acting poorly and so might harm cases, et cetera, right? I think there are already safeguards in the system, right? There are legal consequences for commissioners disclosing confidential information, for example. The worry that I have is whether, if a commissioner is acting in good faith and is trying to escalate a concern about the way a matter has been handled, I don't see the safeguards in the system, as it were, if the system itself is preventing those concerns from getting escalated properly. So again, if there's a requirement that the city attorney's office be contacted and there's a slowdown in the procedure for whatever reason, right, there's no real remedy for that for the commissioner. So I'm more concerned about ensuring that the process can't be, again, I don't want to say either exploit or manipulate. I'll say I want to ensure that the process itself can't present unnecessary obstacles to a commissioner who has concerns, and I'm less concerned about whether or not, there are safeguards against the commissioner acting poorly, because I think that those safeguards are already in place.
I would just say that I'm very happy to have, as I said before, to be able to get that advice. And I think we have to realize that we all do the best we can, but if we we can always use someone who deals with these cases fairly regularly. We could get some advice that would be very helpful and make the process better and make it quicker.
So we'll change that language so that it's not must, but is available. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions for Nick and Eileen?
Did that address all of the questions I had? I mean, I don't have it with me, I can pull it up, but.
Yeah, you had one question about whether there are explicit formal requirements on any other public commission they contact the city attorney. There's no other.
That's been
commission
addressed
that
once we-
has
yep.
this process.
Right. Great.
I think that's really all on yours, and I think the second question, Michelle, that you had sent me was, the other question has to do with external complaints and internal complaints and how they are handled by the commission.
Yes, I think we discussed that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
No, it's,
you're
I think
com-
we- yeah, we
okay.
covered that. This is really looking at external complaints.
I think those are the questions that you had sent us. Right, did we get them all?
Can individual commissioners take action?
Oh, right, thank you.
Oh, right, okay. Individual commissioners are in a difficult spot. All the information that you would, so it depends a little bit about where and how you obtain it.
What's the question, sorry?
The question is, can an individual commissioner act? And I believe that it's like, if you're unhappy with a decision as an individual commissioner, what can you do? Well, it depends a little bit on how you've gotten the information. The bulk of the information you're getting is an executive session from the chief, and you don't have any ability to share that information with anyone. That's the terms of executive session. So I think you're pretty limited as an individual. The commission as a whole, what we're trying to set up, has an ability to decide as a majority, but not an individual commissioner to take information and go to the mayor or city council necessarily about it, because you've learned it in executive session.
So, for example, Randall, if 4 agreed with the chief and 3 wanted to elevate it, right, disagreed with him, what could one of those 3 do?
Right, the question specifically was whether or not we were to understand the policy that we were working on as essentially kind of replacing or superseding the rights of an individual commissioner to bring up concerns if they see fit, right? And so I think.
In this process, though, within this process?
Well, outside of the process, right? And so understanding that, again, that it's not permissible to disclose information that cannot be disclosed, right? So information that's gotten in executive session cannot be disclosed. Independent of that, are we to understand this this policy as, kind of, right, as essentially negating or replacing rights that individual commissioners have qua individual citizens, not commissioners, to raise concerns in a way that they see fit, right? And the SPAC statutes make that kind of explicit, that the SPAC commission can bring concerns to state officials, to the media, et cetera. And ours did not say that, so that's why I was wondering about that.
So if it is not a matter covered in executive session,
Right.
then I think you have whatever rights you have as a citizen, or as a commissioner would about any matter before you. So anything that's said here, for example.
We disagree with the majority.
Right.
And this is why, as long as it's
Right.
not
Yeah.
from
That's right.
executive session.
Yep, yep.
Okay, good question.
So I understand then, so if the vote is 4-3, say to support the chief's recommendation, and the 3 dissenting people feel strongly, they can go and just express their dissent to the
With-
commission without getting into why or some of the evidence that they heard necessarily, but that they can express their dissent from a majority opinion.
I think as long as they don't reveal confidential information, that yes, I think that right is always available to dissenting members.
Okay.
Yeah, I couldn't see a process where you couldn't do that. That would seem to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else? No? So do you have enough to take and kind of give us a final draft that we can hopefully review and approve at our next meeting, and then we'll take it to public safety?
We certainly do, and so what we'll do is we'll take this feedback and send out another draft. But the language that I got out of this discussion was moving away from a shall and creating a may. And just some notes I jotted down was changing the language to say, if a majority of the commission disagrees with the chief's decision, the commission may appeal to the mayor and may also consult with the city attorney's office for advice related to the use and disclosure of confidential
That's great.
information. Something along
Yeah.
those
Do you want
lines.
that? You okay with that?
Yeah, fine, fine. Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll consolidate that and get that back out to this group.
That said if a majority disagrees, right? Is that what you read?
It's just say if a majority of the commission disagrees with the chief's decision.
But I mean, dissenting folks can consult with us too, so.
We need to put anything in there about the rights of dissenting commissioners, or is, again, I don't know if it's just an inherent right you have to go out and dissent, or whether, I don't know, I'm just asking, because what we just talked about.
I'm happy to put something in if you think that would be clear enough.
Do you think it's necessary? So, again, my understanding is essentially that the commission as a whole might express its concern about the chief's decision, for example. If the commission as a whole does not express that concern, the individuals can do so if they see fit. But it's not, expressing a concern, a position of the commission to the mayor directly, which is what the policy lays out.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna say the majority can, then I think it does make sense then to perhaps say something about what the dissent can or cannot do either, so that either say nothing or make it clear.
Well, yeah, I guess if you've got a dissenting vote, they could go to the mayor, but they're not representing the commission.
Oh, sure.
They're
Yeah,
going to the
but-
mayor as
or
a
the
citizen,
public.
but they can't talk about anything that we talked about in
Right.
executive session. So
Right.
I wonder if it's even a moot point, because this is really talking about some confidential.
No, I think it's not a moot point. I mean, if I felt strongly that in opposition to something, I'd want to go down and call it to, I may not be able to say all the reasons why I think it's the wrong decision, but I could be asking to take another look at it, to dive into it themselves, to review this, because there's something wrong here.
Yeah,
You know, if
good
I feel
point.
strongly about that, I don't think I want to be hamstrung by not being.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay, we'll work on some language then for that. And send so that the folks who dissented are not in the majority. One other point is that the Public Safety Commission, I understand, asked in number 8 that the may be changed to shall, so that it says the commission shall provide a report to the Burlington City Council twice each year regarding this policy.
Well, I don't know if we want to word it like that. The thought was,
Yes.
if we're going to be doing citizen oversight, and how do we let citizens know we're doing it? The only way to really do that is to go to city council, make it public. And part of it can be done in the annual report, which we do anyway. And the other one would be halfway through the year, just saying, we've been reviewing all the complaints, we have no concerns, and, we've had X number of complaints, certain number were unfounded, whatever, however we want to report that. But then I feel strongly that we also need to balance it out, that say, and we've had X number of letters of commendation to police officers. Like, we're citizen oversight, so we're looking at the oversight of the behavior that's not helpful, bad behavior, and good behavior. We're really trying to, and one of the things that I know, I'm a big believer in appreciative inquiry, that which you appreciate appreciates. So if there's cops doing a lot of really wonderful things, we should acknowledge that if we want to get more of it. And that's what we're trying to do, lift the whole performance of the agency. So I don't know if it's regarding this policy or just commission shall provide a report to city council twice a year, updating them on, I guess citizen oversight, I guess.
In general, citizens don't need redress against officers doing good things well. So that's,
Sorry?
I said, generally citizens don't need redress against officers doing things well, which I think is why it's not made explicit that we give a report semi-annually about the things that officers are doing well.
So you don't think we should do that, or?
I don't think I don't think it's what we're being tasked with from public safety.
Right, well, we did talk about it at public safety, because if it's really about public safety and officer behavior, we can sort of debate it, but I think, at least I'll speak from my opinion, in my opinion, it's the good things that cops are doing, and if a cop does something wrong, that's a concern too. But I believe that I'm more interested in reality. What is the reality? If we're getting a ton of complaints and we've got issues, let's lay it on the table and deal with it. If we've got cops doing really good work, I, as a citizen, want to know about that too. Like, whatever the reality is, let's deal with the truth and deal with whatever that truth is.
Well, again, go.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the way you report, the specific problems, you deal with it specifically. You can speak generally and say, but the overwhelming, I don't think you have to go through tit for tat.
No. It's just reporting what is the landscape, not.
Well, but again, it seems to me as though we ought not consider our responsibility here as giving a kind of, state of the police department for X number of months or years. Right? I think our obligation is to ensure that citizens who have concerns about policing are, have some confidence that their concerns are being addressed. And it seems to me as though people who are happy with with the good things that officers are doing don't have that concern, which is why that's not an explicit, requirement that we address that, or that we, give them that voice.
Anybody else have a thought on that?
I tend to agree. I think, we're an oversight over, the lack of our need to jump into these things is itself testimony that we're a good department, we got good officers doing good. I don't think we need to make, commendations part of that. I think it's this thing that we've talked about in terms of individual officer interaction, going to a roll call or recognizing an officer, in our own private kind of way, I think is important. But I don't know if we need to be reporting on, all the good things that are going on, and just act as an oversight for those things that come up that we're looking at. So I guess if that's what I think you're saying. I would tend to agree that the formality of this is about oversight over complaints. We've talked about other ways to get the good word out about what's going on to officers and things, and I think that's a good thing to do, and I think we should be doing that as a commission, but not to necessarily intersperse it with this process.
I agree with that as well.
Okay. All right. Well, just if you can say instead of may, shall.
But also, did you want it, okay, because I thought you were saying two things, so you're okay, as long as that report can be in the form of written or a presentation to city council, you wanted flexibility in that regard, right?
Yes.
Okay, but as written, I think that's fine, that it could take any form of report.
I think so.
Okay.
Should we add that each one of those reports shall be with the final report at the end of the year? So it's the final report and then halfway through, or just twice a year?
To you, I think it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Okay, that's fine. Okay, great. Thank you so much
Thank you.
for coming.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, while we're on civilian oversight, we all got complaint forms last time. I know there's been a lot going on in the agency. It's been, there's been a lot going on. But I think it's a good idea if all of us schedule time with Jan between now and our November meeting, so that we've gone through the process once, Randall, you
Jan,
haven't.
and
So
I
to
didn't
go
get
through the
any.
process of meeting with Jan
Are
and
there any-
reviewing the complaints that you received. So that you
Have
can
any come
see
in since?
how they're
I don't
handled,
care.
and if you have any concerns about them, we'll talk about them.
So you can get the feedback before December's meeting?
Before
Okay.
December, so we're gonna really wanna have gone through that process before we meet in November. So that just involves contacting Laura and getting on Chief Wright's calendar.
Could I ask just a question about that? So I met with Jan today and went through the 4 that I had. Are we supposed to do anything more with that in terms of this process? I mean, I went through and, had a very good discussion about the 4 complaints that I got. I'm not sure what is supposed to happen after that. I mean, I heard, is it only if I have a concern, or Is it something I'm supposed to keep confidential to some extent, so there's some that haven't heard it in case those complaints continue on somehow, or, I guess they're not clear.
Well, my understanding, the way we had talked about it before, is reviewing them. If I have a concern with any of the complaints and how they were handled, then we would go into executive session and talk with the chief, Chief Wright and Chief Del Pozo. If I don't have any concern about how they're handled, then I'm sort of signing off and saying, yep, I don't have any concerns about how they're handled. That was my, is that?
That
That
was my
makes sense to me,
impression as well.
yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's how we handled it last time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I'll just say right now, this is not something which I think needs to be acted upon in any way, or at least as of right now. But right, so part of the idea is we're kind of looking at how the process is working right now. And my understanding is that there's a certain kind of severity of complaint beyond which the entire commission will be aware of the complaint. Right below that threshold, each complaint is kind of distributed among individual commissioners, so that some people are essentially kind of are still have no prior knowledge of it in case it comes to the formal process. Because of course I only see the complaints that I have, the subset of complaints that I have, it's hard for me to tell what the range of complaints are, which count as kind of below the threshold. So I don't have a very good way of assessing what the threshold is for minor versus major complaints, or like what sort of complaint might be escalated to the entire commission. So it's just going to be difficult for me to judge that aspect of it. Like I said, I don't think it needs to be acted on now, but that's a concern I have about.
I think that's a good point.
Why don't we, because we're all gonna get to review complaints, why don't we put that on the agenda for our next meeting? And what we could do, because we can't talk about the action, the disciplinary action taken of the public, here, we can go into executive session and just have a quick conversation about the types of complaints, and we could maybe talk about that there. Does that make sense? Any thoughts?
Yeah, the only other option is for the whole packet to go to everybody. No, we can't do that because if any get escalated. I mean, I was gonna say, one of the things happened the first month is I had all of the complaints and I had divided them up. And I was looking for a case today, and so I was going through them, and that does give you, when you get to see the whole range.
Well, I mean, it seems to me there's no problem in principle with us all seeing all of the complaints without knowing what the disciplinary judgment is, right? So
Right.
with the material that I have, of course, there's nothing that
It's
says
just
anything
the-
about
it's
the
just the
judgment.
complaint, right.
And it's hard for me to see why just knowing what the nature of the complaint, why that would prejudice a commissioner in case it needs to get escalated. So I don't see why we can't all at least see all of the complaints, even if we only see the judgment on a subset of
I mean,
them.
it looks better it looks better in terms of accountability if we are all seeing all of the complaints, even if we're not all addressing them and reviewing them, right?
Yeah, this goes back to the issue of, if it ever surfaces at a hearing, I mean, we've gotten some perspective already, which we're all acknowledging, and yet we're here to hear what new information there may be there, you know what I'm saying? So it's not entirely independent in that we will have seen the complaint, have had discussions either amongst ourselves or with the deputy chief. But if one of those surfaces as an appeal comes up to us, I mean, I think we'd have to disclose that, we've reviewed the complaint and we've heard some information, but we're here to hear whatever new information is available and conduct as best a hearing we can as a commission.
Is it possible, is it within the rules to email us all the complaints as opposed to making copies?
Yes, they've been redacted, so that's not a
Okay.
problem.
Because I'd rather not have so much paper. If we could just get an email, then we can just look through
And
them.
then there could be a cover sheet that says Michelle Ash
Has
has
this
one,
one.
complaints number such and such, and just a title page, and that way we can track them.
So, all members will get all complaints within a round with a particular numbers that they're assigned to, that they will meet with,
Yeah,
but
so
you'll
they're
be aware of
individual
all of them.
information.
And then after that,
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah. Good idea.
And then that gives you the scope of
Another part of this is making sure that citizens have access to the complaint form. And so, well, access is one issue, and then we also decided that the letter that's attached to the complaint form would come both from the chief and the commission. So Shireen did a great job at a first cut at writing that letter, and I think everybody got it.
The chief wrote it, and I just.
And then you edited
The
it.
perspective of the commission.
Of the commission, and then, I think, what's that? And then it was edited again. So this is the letter. If everyone's had a chance to, have you had a chance to read that?
No, but
I think it was in the packet.
I don't think it was. We just finished the edits after, so it's right there. We finished the edits after I'd sent out the
So it's not in
initial.
this version, is we did get this.
Yeah, we got this in the email that you sent out.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You were so efficient, Laura.
even know
I'm
it.
not sure about that, but great. Yeah, so you should all, if you didn't get an email, it should be in front of you, citizen complaint process.
Yeah,
Yep.
And I just, to save paper, I just double-sided it, but I think in theory, at locations, you'll want to have two pieces so that people have the opportunity to write further on the back.
Yep.
And we also hadn't said in the previous one, the one that's now up online, that they could remain anonymous wasn't an option. It is when you submit online, but when you print the form, that wasn't given as an option, so I added that to the revised one.
So the reason this is here is we just wanted everybody to see this letter, so if you are okay with it. And once it's okay, I'm gonna take a bunch to AALB and to the Vermont Refugee Resettlement and talk to them about the citizen oversight that we're doing and making sure that the population that they work with is really comfortable and knows how to file a complaint. So.
We do have paper copies of this, but of course, we're talking about the version that's going online. They have the option of remaining anonymous, but we do log the IP addresses. We store that with the complaints.
Those automatically, I think, come in on the electronic versions, but they are there. There's really not much we can do with those unless we have a subpoena.
Right. Well, right. So I'm essentially wondering whether that address needs to be stored with the complaint itself, or whether that can be essentially dissociated in case of a subpoena or other legal judgment.
Sure, if they want to remain anonymous, we can redact it.
ways they could do it anonymously.
No, that's right. But I think requiring a citizen who wants to lodge, who wants to be confident
No,
in their
I'm just
anonymous complaint,
saying
yeah.
that-
But there always is going to be now an availability in the community. They don't have to do anything on a computer. They can go to various organizations in the community, fill out a form with help, with a translator.
Yep.
And they don't have to come here, they don't have to do anything that is digitally traced.
Yeah.
And you
That seems
said
good.
Community Justice Center. Did you mean the Peace and Justice Center? Or, no,
There's
Well,
a s-
either or.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch. I mean, there's ALV, the Peace and Justice Center, Community Justice Center. We talked the library. Right, I didn't add that here. I noted we need to include those, but I didn't want to include them until we know that they're there.
Yeah.
So once you, or we, whomever determines what are those good locations, I mean, City Hall,
Right.
then we can,
So
when we
let's-
know they're there, we can add that.
I would think Burlington High School, because we have, right, because you've got the school resource officer there.
I would say you can probably go to any city department. You can probably go to any city department, whether it be Parks Department, Arts, Burlington City Arts, any place, HR, and file a complaint. It should be any city.
And the library, and the Peace and Justice Center, and where else did we talk about? The Community Justice Center?
Community Justice Center, which they're both part of the city. The Peace and Justice Center isn't, but it's a good option. AALV is a good option.
The Miller Center.
Yep.
an option, right?
Yep.
And then, is there anything in the south end? And you've got Parks and Rec here.
King Street's down there.
Burlington Electric.
Yeah, Burlington
it would be
Electric,
there, right?
DPW.
Yeah, there's several.
So I would say all city departments and then some of our other partners that we communicate a lot with.
So once you guys have done that, if you want to let me know, and I'm happy to help too, but it
Would you
might
say
be best to
done
come
what?
from you. Once those are delivered, and maybe we have a contact person there, and again, I'm happy to help distribute those, but once they're there, I'll add the locations where they are available to
Well,
this.
I'd like to propose that all the city departments, you guys you can send them some. But the non-city departments, I'm happy to go to Peace and Justice Center, AALV, and the Vermont Refugee Resettlement. Was there another non-city?
We have, okay, I have,
Migrant justice is out there. Migrant justice.
Migrant Justice, yep.
Migrant justice.
ACLU.
But that's the city.
yeah, so I will distribute to city departments. And then we have CJ, and this is all in the minutes, CJC, AALV, City Hall, which I can do, Burlington High School, Peace and Justice Center, Miller Center, Refugee Resettlement, Migrant Justice.
Okay. Do you want us to say which ones we can do?
I think we can take care of the city departments. That's an easy fix.
Yeah. Because I could do Miller Center and BHS, for example, if you want. That'd be great.
And maybe you could establish a contact person there, and so they can reach out to me if they run out, basically. How do we make sure they're stocked? And so whether they reach out to you or me, and I just drop them off or email and they can print them, whatever they're willing to
Do you
do.
have a card too, Laura?
I do.
Okay.
Not
Maybe
right
we'll
here,
give
but I
them
do.
a nil
Yeah.
envelope with your card stapled to it, so it's like.
Yep.
So I'll do AALV and Vermont Refugee Resettlement, and I'm happy to do Peace and Justice Center unless somebody else wants to do it.
So you said ALV, and what was the other one?
Vermont Refugee Resettlement, and I'll do the Peace and Justice Center unless somebody else wants to do it. And I think when we do go, my plan is to give them context. This is something new that the city council has done a resolution requiring the police commission to do. We're really excited about doing this, and we want to make it really easy. If somebody's had an incident and needs to file a complaint, we want people to have access.
Would it make sense to have someone from the commission or you, chief, present a roll call on this so officers know?
Sure.
Because, for example, it would be great for the school resource officer to be aware of this. Because what if they get asked about it, not to do with themselves, but just, or they might be asked, I want to make a complaint about you. It's awkward, but that they should know this is how you do it, right? So that might be helpful to let them know this is where these are going to be distributed and you should be aware that this exists. Yeah.
We can certainly do that.
Was there another thing that was non-city that needs to be done?
CJC.
That's city.
Oh, it is. ALV, City Department, City Hall, BHS, Peace and Justice, Fletcher Free. I'll do that. Miller Center, Refugee, Migrant Justice.
Migrant Justice.
I have a contact from there.
You do?
Mm.
Okay, so will you?
Yep.
That would be great. I don't know that organization. Okay, awesome. Commissioner comments and updates. I have a couple right off the bat. I wanted to let you all know that I did attend the Substat and the ComStat for dealing with opioids in the county. I highly recommend you all do it. It's very, very interesting. Substat really dealt with more policing issues. It was amazing to see the heads of police agencies in the county there talking about different cases, people really with the intent of how do we help these folks? How do we get the real bad guys off the streets? it was a little heartbreaking, some of the cases too, to hear about these young folks that, young women that are hooked on opioids that get involved in sex trafficking, and so now they've got a drug addiction, now they're victims of sex crimes, and you know, it was impressive to see the coordinated effort in Substat. Comstat it was a 3-hour meeting, and it went like that. It was powerful. People from the head of corrections was there, and I mean, it was just people from all over the state. And the meeting, no media is allowed in the meeting. I really got the sense that under the leadership of Chief Del Pozo and the mayor, the meeting was really about education, and they actually had somebody from New York City jail system talk about how they treat people in the New York City jail system that have an opioid addiction, and how they've been doing it since the 80s, and their sort of outcomes around that, which the state of Vermont is really starting to do. So it was education, and then collaboration, and really listening to each other, and brainstorming, and talking, and they had the sister of Maddie, the young girl that recently died in the military. She was there and spoke, and she was pretty eloquent and pretty determined to hold everybody's feet to the fire to solve it. But it was just great that it was a forum for her to come and talk to the folks that are trying to deal with this in the state. So it was great. It was great. I highly recommend it. I did go to the chief talked about when the supervisors get together. I think you guys called it the Leadership Summit to talk about civilian oversight. So it wasn't very long. I just let them know what we were doing. But one of the things the questions that I asked, it was interesting. I wanted to know, how do they want to be acknowledged for the good work they do when we know that they do good work? Because we're brainstorming, but most importantly, how do they want to hear it? And they didn't really have any ideas about that, but they had a lot of, it seemed to me, what makes the police officers feel supported to do the work they're doing is for us to better understand what they do. Because the ideas that came were, please go and do a ride-along with an officer on a busy night so you can actually better understand the work that we do. Also, participate in the community academy. Did everybody get that email?
Yeah, is anyone gonna, I signed up
I
for
signed
it.
up.
Good, I hope.
I didn't get it, no.
It's the Burlington, Laura sent an email with it. Burlington,
Well, it's
oh no,
Connie,
Connie.
right?
Constance.
Constance sent it out last week, right?
Yeah, 6th Annual Community Academy. Community Academy is a fabulous opportunity for Burlington residents to learn about the laws, procedures, and day-to-day activities of the Burlington Police Department. The Academy meets once a week for 6 weeks, 3 hours at a time. The topics include mental health and drug policy, crime scene investigation, domestic violence, criminal law, use of force, K-9 unit, active shooter response, and more. So it's a way for us just to.
And I think it includes a ride-along, is that?
It includes.
Yes, you can sign up for a ride-along as well.
So it's January 9th and February 12th, and it's Wednesday nights, except for the last one is a Tuesday night.
So it sounds just, again, for me, I'm just trying I feel like to do my job as a commissioner, I need to understand. Hi, Chief.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Just want to understand policing better. More important decisions, so, And then the other thing, Chief Wright talked about it, were the bios of each of us for the leadership in the police department. They just want to know who we are. And I thought that was a great sort of an idea for them to do. So you guys want to, should we do it for next meeting? Email Laura just a short bio
Half a
before our
page?
November meeting.
Half a page? Page?
Yeah, half a page. Half a page. Does that sound good? Okay. So, Chief Wright did a good job giving the chief's report. Did you have anything that you wanted to?
Yeah, first I'd like to thank you for your forbearance. I thought when I got off the plane, it got in a little early, that I would just drop in on the memorial, but there was 600 people there, okay, 500 to 600, completely full downstairs. The lobby was crowded, completely full upstairs, and the upstairs lobby was crowded, and it was clear that the community really needed to see the leaders of Burlington there, standing with them and letting them know that we're all together in this. So I had to make a judgment. I knew that you were in great hands, so thank you for that. I don't know exactly what you said.
You don't want to know. You can watch Channel 17.
Gosh. I'd be happy to answer any questions about what Jan brought up, but I will say that we are looking to hire.
This is what we talked
Hug
about.
duck. Okay, good. I'm glad she handled the duck
we
hunters.
didn't talk about this.
You didn't cancel the. You didn't talk about the duck hunting yet.
No.
She saved it for you.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, listen. One of the things that's good news, we just extended. We just have an accepted offer from our first Muslim police officer. So we have a Sri Lankan American who's a permanent resident in New York City who'll be moving here to join the police force. We also have some other good, as far as diversity goes, candidates. They're excellent cops. We're contemplating hiring another Vietnamese American, another African American. We've already accepted an offer, mutually, to hire a woman. So if you look at our class, if that pans out in the coming next, let's say, 2 months, that'll be the most diverse hiring class in the history, probably of Vermont, honestly. And we'll keep going at it. So that's good news. Anything else?
I don't think so.
I will reiterate what Michelle, Commissioner Ash said about bios. I think have you talked about your visit to the supervisors meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought it was excellent. I thought it lifted the veil of mystery a little bit. It wasn't just the chief trying to explain ad hoc what the commission does, catch as catch can with supervisors. It was all of them in a room. They met, a member of the commission. You took your time explaining things to them. And I don't know if you want to share your impressions, but I think they came away really much better versed in what the commission does, and they were less sort of fearful of it.
I think I think that's true. I think that they are more aware now of its role. I think it's less of a potential sort of boogeyman. Your description of the nature of the oversight, the nature of a collaborative process whereby there's an emphasis too on good work and on recognizing that, I think was very important.
Do we need to talk about the duck hunters?
We gotta hear about it now. Duck hunt.
No.
You intrigued them.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm the one that asked the question.
No, it's fine, because there's a legitimate public interest about people are hearing gunshots for duck season. I've been here now 3 seasons. This is my 4th. It's been a worry every season. To be clear about what the law says, if folks were to ask you, I've gotten questions from the city council, city hall. Like it or not, if you're a duck hunter, the city's jurisdiction extends from this peninsula here in the water all the way down to the southern border of the city. So we have, by matter of city charter, an ordinance against discharging firearms within the limits of the city. The limits of the city is not only the beaches, which seems no duh, but the limits of the city is also this water from the peninsula to the southern border. It's an imaginary line from the westernmost tip of Apple Tree Point to the westernmost point of Oakledge. That is the layperson interpretation of the charter language. So, as I just did visually. So, hunters have disputed that. They've said, I don't care. They've set up blinds there. They've done some duck hunting. Our reading of the law is that the main reason why we have this law, and so it doesn't apply really anywhere else in Vermont but here. I don't know if Montpelier or Barry or, for example, Rutland have ordinances to prohibit firearms discharge. But unlike them, we have this huge body of water and a border that extends well into it. So if you're asking what my priorities are for firearms discharges, I don't want people shooting guns in their backyards. I don't want people shooting guns near our populated beaches. I don't want people shooting guns in areas that are inappropriate in the city. If people are on the beach or in the woods shooting out over the water, I'm not saying that that's lawful or it's fine. I just don't, I'm a little bit stymied about an operational plan to hunt the hunters. You know, are we going to get the 911 call and then send cops to typically in the woods or near the shore? They're in blinds. Are we going to have our cops go find the hunters and issue ordinance violations? And I'm not saying that, don't take by my tone that the answer is no. It just happens for a few weeks a year, and they shouldn't be doing it. It's clear, and they shouldn't be doing it in the water. Some of them don't understand that. But just talking for some of our cops who are hunters, how to enforce that seems like it's a little dangerous, and it seems like it would be hard, right?
Approximately how many calls per duck season do we get, either kind of inquiries or
Well,
calls of service?
here's where we do get it. We get it, so I'm not trying to dodge your question. We get it on social media. People will highlight my name, so then I get a notification that I've been mentioned, and I'll go check it out. It'll be in the conversations. People have complained that these signs have been torn down on our beaches. That came to my attention. Our dispatch gets, I mean, I'm going to say a handful, like it's more than a dozen, but it's less than 3 dozen, and that's for the whole season. And it's not a call of someone shooting in a backyard. It's not a call of somebody shooting within eyesight of someone. It's a call of hearing gunfire by the lake.
It's not even a report at the time of, in the way that a call to 911 or dispatch would be. Oftentimes, this has been happening.
Right. So, not to say I'm a little flummoxed, but I'm trying to gauge the, if there's any indication that people are shooting inland or on their property, it would be a much, much different matter. We would take some reaction, but we aren't getting reports like that.
So it's
I don't know if
not-
you guys are
They're
hearing
not
anything.
breaking the law if they're walking down the beach with their gun.
So they're not, that's right. And they're also, if they're in the water here, above Apple Tree Point, they're not breaking the law. So if they here, they're not breaking the law, but here, they are. I think that's a little bit of confusion, and it shows when the city boundary was drawn as defined, it was not drawn in order to ensure that we can enforce the firearms discharge laws over the lake. It was drawn, I don't know, because we just wanted to own that piece of the lake for tax purposes or something.
I
don't
do
know.
hear,
Yeah.
I hear duck hunters down, live over the homestead,
Yeah.
and I hear them down there. So that's legal, I suppose, if they're on the Winooski River.
Yes, it is.
I know you've had at least a modest information campaign. You posted this on Twitter, maybe some other social
In
media.
Facebook as well, yeah.
Do you plan to do anything else to kind of discourage firearms discharge during duck season, or is this pretty much?
I think that what we should do, if Laura's kind enough to keep me on task, is in the lead up to hunting season, to duck season, we should start with a persistent campaign and get it out. What that might do, I mean, it'd be interesting if that generated, we would also send out a press release to the local media. In fact, I can send out a press release now. We're still in the middle of duck hunting season. But I think ironically, if it generated some pushback, that would be better for advertising and settling the issue. So maybe we'll just try to, I hate to say this, we'll just try to agitate more in the run-up to duck hunting season next year. And you bring up a good point, Michelle, like if someone's walking on the beach with a shotgun, you're allowed to do that. I mean, unequivocally, you're allowed to do that in this state. You're allowed to walk around with a gun in plain view anywhere, at any time. It's just discharging it. So we then would have the difficulty of like, literally, we'd have a hunter blind to catch the hunters in the duck blind, right? And catch them discharging the firearms. So you could see why I'm a little flummoxed. But again, I assure you, I don't know if I don't know, are you hearing, you hear the shots sometimes. Are you hearing anything that indicates that it's happening in a way that, I'm asking a sincere question, that we should be concerned about, or?
No.
Okay.
I hear the shots, and there's people that walk down the beach with a gun, but
Yeah, so can you say what frequency that happens with, or?
this year I've seen it once.
Right. And it's within the beach, like within, it's not the north part here, it's within yeah, they're hunting.
It's by Letty.
Yeah.
So, okay. I was just asked, I asked the question because Brian Pine from Public Safety.
Oh, yeah, no, he asked us as well, right, no, he's right. I mean, I'd be happy to talk to folks about this, and I think we should do I think, Randall's spot on about doing a better job of making this clear to people than social media. That works, but I think there should be a run-up to it.
Does anybody else have, this is number 7, Commissioner updates, comments. Anybody have anything they want to talk about? No? Consent agenda. let's, any changes, modifications to the minutes of the previous meeting? No?
I move to accept.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, so we're just about finished. Next meeting's agenda items. Regional dispatch update, so we'll have that. And then, Laura, I know we had a couple of things. I think we're gonna collect the bios from people. And we're gonna talk, you're gonna email everybody all of the complaints and all of the citizen complaints?
The existing ones or new?
Yes.
The existing ones,
that you have had already.
the existing ones I will email all of you.
Okay, so that everybody can see all of them?
Yep.
And between now and the next meeting, we'll have met with Chief Wright, and then we'll just talk about how that process works.
Sign your life away.
Anything else that we need to do on the agenda?
Let's set up a meeting to talk about uniforms after John's waiver class.
These are commissions for the new hires and the promotions, which you reviewed in executive session at the last meeting, so you are aware of all.
We'll be too busy until then.
Do we have a need to go into executive session?
Yeah, we'd like to show you a few things, yeah.
Okay. So we need a motion to move this into executive session?
Discuss what, personnel?
Investigatory matters.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.